Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending today. Our work session is it's March 5th, Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, should I say, for those who celebrate. And our work session is on the Community Planning, Housing and Development Planning Division work program. And it is called an update. This is a useful check-in with our urban planners here and the amazing staff behind Mr. Fossarelli's department, who have been the authors of such amazing work in the past and currently. Is one of the departments that attracts a lot of public attention. This is why we thought that's a good idea today to separate this work session so that we have a little bit more of a time to discuss about what the department has been doing and how you have been managing the many requests of work and many business lines that you have, and also inform the public about these. So with that, thank you, Mr. Manager, for making that possible. Mr. Fossarelli for being here. I also want to greet and welcome the chair of our Planning Commission, Ms. Peterson, and everybody from the CPHD staff who is here today and took the time to prepare for this session. We talked a little bit with our staff about how to structure a conversation. Initially, I proposed to split it in 4 parts. We will it is probably better to split it in 2 parts. That's slide 1 to 10 first. That takes us in. Will provide us an overview of what the department is doing, its accomplishments and key considerations, and also give us an update on ongoing work. And then we will pause for discussion. I would invite Ms. Peterson then to give us the Planning Commission's view of this, and then we will continue with a presentation on what is ahead, so the long-range planning and zoning studies and cross-departmental work. Mr. Manager, and Mr. Fossarelli, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly before I turn it over to Anthony, we have a budget conversation coming up next week on CPHD's work plan. And I know it's an obvious point, but I like to make it every time we have one of these sessions. Everything that Anthony's talking about, which is CPHD is doing, has a reflection in both DES, DPR, County Attorney's Office, the County Board work, the work of our commissions. So although we lay out plans, and Anthony's going to talk about what our priorities are, they're all dependent on collaboration and work with other departments and also members of our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony.
All right. Thank you and good afternoon. Today, on behalf of my team, we are pleased to have the opportunity to present to you our Planning Division work program for calendar year 2025 and beyond. After our presentation, we're looking forward to discussion or during it with all of you to receive any clarifying questions and also the sense of the board as to whether our proposed work program priorities are generally consistent with those of the board for the coming year. For framing, if we can get the slides pull up, thank you. So for framing, this slide lists the main components of today's presentation. After a reintroduction to the Planning Division and our recent accomplishments, we'll share our perspectives and approach in shaping this year's work program. We will present our outlook on development review pipeline and related activities, and also highlight our top priorities for our long-range planning and growth management efforts. Then, after noting our top priority zoning studies for this year, we'll speak to continued collaboration in the arena of CMRI, or commercial market resiliency. And finally, we'll close in reviewing many more ways that our team supports other divisions and departments, as well as advisory commissions, and otherwise aim to serve as stewards of good stewards of effective governance through our work. So the Planning Division, to be sure, is one of 6 within Community Planning, Housing, and Development. Our division is organized into 3 core teams. Current Planning, led by Aaron Schreiber and supported by Matt Pfeiffer as Section Supervisor. Comprehensive Planning, managed by Jennifer Smith and supported by Matt Ladd as Section Supervisor. And Urban Design, led by Supervisor Chris Kreider. Our administrative team, Joanne Harrison and Giselle Johnson, also clerk to the Planning Commission, provides excellent and critical support to all of us, enabling us to do our work and do it well. The division has 30 full-time positions with 2 current vacancies, 1 each in comprehensive planning and urban design. The vacant comprehensive planning principal planner position is an identified reduction in the manager's proposed fiscal 26 budget. Before proceeding, I did want to recognize and appreciate the exceptional work of the staff of the Planning Division team. It is my privilege to work with them on a daily basis and with such a dedicated and highly skilled group of professionals. The division's many accomplishments would not be possible if it were not for every individual on our team. In 2024, the Planning Division completed several notable projects. A few examples related to county board approvals include 9 major site plan and use permit developments, continued work on the Barcroft Apartments Master Financing and Development Plan, land use analysis and vision plan updates, the Melwood Site Special Glove Study, 6 zoning ordinance amendments, including updates to form-based codes, the CO Crystal City Building Heights, and CO Roslyn, to name a few, and readoption of the Pentagon City Sector Plan. Several other notable items we continue to support in collaboration with others, the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative. Our team updated the reference guide to landscape standards and also completed the Missing Middle Housing Study EHO annual report. To illustrate the interconnected nature of our work, consider, if you would, the life cycle of a planning project using West Roslyn as a case study. So planning clearly is not a one-and-done process. In many areas of Arlington, an idea, opportunity, or need initiates a planning process to create a future vision. Once adopted, this vision may lead to general land use plan changes and rezonings before site plans and use permits for specific developments are reviewed that help realize that vision. Our work also extends beyond county board approval. We review and approve final approval plans. We sign off on facade materials and landscape plans. We conduct inspections. We process administrative changes and may return to the board with subsequent related site plan amendments or use permits. And so the planning pathway for West Roslyn demonstrates just some of the ways in which our team supports realizing the vision through multiple touch points, yet it does not show how many others also play a role as well. But what this ultimately translates to on the ground is significant community transformation, as that shown here, realized over a short period. Again, this level of change was possible only through collaboration and partnership with many, and involved both private and public investment. To help realize this change, our planning team was involved at many steps in the process, meaning recurring demands on our time and the time of others. But in the end, as we see here, the results included nearly 900 market units, nearly 250 committed affordable units, a new county fire station, a new APS school, a new public park, and more than 25,000 square feet of retail. And so while this is one of the more powerful, I think, examples of an Arlington place going from idea to implementation in just a few years, the experience of having multiple touch points is in planning through our work is commonplace. So in framing our work program, I want to highlight 6 key considerations that inform our proposal. Timely manage non-discretionary development review services, focusing major long-range planning work on our top 2 to 3 priorities before adding new initiatives, evolving the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative into economic resiliency through partnership with others, advancing several targeted zoning studies to address known challenges and opportunities, reflecting also the more limited services from proposed reduced staffing, but also growing capacity through professional development. And importantly, reserving flexibility really to initiate unanticipated planning and zoning studies, the law that unexpected work will always come up. Beyond these considerations, there are a few additional points I would just underscore. First, these priorities that we'll discuss today are those priorities as of March 5th, 2025. While we expect to advance and complete these priorities in the next year or two, we also understand that priorities can change, they may shift, and we need to be nimble and ready to adapt with that. Inclusion in the work program also doesn't guarantee that all of these projects will be completed by the end of 2025. And we can talk more about that later on in detail. The timing and progression of this work also may not always be linear. And then finally, discretionary items on the work program are often informed by previously identified opportunities or challenges where we see potential for significant community impact. And these may be identified through inputs that we receive either externally from the community or internally from within our county organization. We continue to prioritize and center equity in our work program, and this involves applying a racial equity lens and conducting equity analyses for potential policy and regulatory changes. It also involves evaluating and negotiating community benefits from developments projects to achieve equitable outcomes. We're continuing to adapt and update our engagement methods to ensure all voices, especially those traditionally underrepresented, are heard. And the County Board last April adopted the Regional Equitable Development Principles, which we are working to apply through our work towards eliminating, reducing, and preventing disparities. And additionally, we and others work on expanding data tools and resources to support our equity efforts, such as the recent release of the Community Vulnerability Index map produced by CPHD's research team in partnership with others. And so regarding the work program specifics, we'll begin here with current planning and development review before pausing for discussion. In addition to 11 recently approved projects over the last 14 months, we have many applications in various stages of review, 10 active site plans, and a few preliminary and conceptual reviews with approximately 8 projects we consider on hold. We are also tracking approximately 11 projects for which we anticipate potential applications filed later this year or in 2026. And of these, we have several adaptive reuse applications under preliminary review and anticipated soon, building upon the board's adoption of that related policy late last year. And in the lower right table, when accounting for all the applications in the review pipeline, our 2025 statistics are essentially even with the trends we've seen in the past several years, reflecting a sustained and high level of interest in entitlement activity here in Arlington. And then the last slide before pausing, beyond development review, it's important to note that the current planning and urban designing teams in particular will direct significant time to support other typical daily duties and responsibilities. Examples include application acceptance and providing support to the customer service center, managing the review and recommendations for minor site plan amendments, use permit applications and reviews, as well as form-based code use permit developments as well. Along with the urban design team and others, the division reviews many administrative change requests, as well as facade and landscape plan reviews and completes related inspections. We're continuing to implement changes informed by the recently completed fee analysis, advancing project tracking enhancements, and updating application plan submission requirements. In addition to that daily ongoing work, for 2025, we have several additional top priorities we would call out. For Administrative Regulation 4.1, we're in the process of completing the first update, just about completed that update for the first time in several years. the lapsing of automatic extensions in the Code of Virginia for previously entitled projects going back the past 15 years or so will lead to many site plan amendments coming forward to us and then to this board before the summertime, so that those projects can seek county board renewal instead of lapsing on June 30th. We also have work to do in terms of addressing updates to the form-based code admin regs, including a new phase development use permit mechanism, an application type that will be critical to supporting future implementation at Barcroft. The Clarendon Live Entertainment Group collective is up for county board review coming forward later this spring. And then we'll also endeavor to move forward with the next round of updates to the standard site plan conditions. It's also finally, it's important to note here that we expect these priorities to be sequenced and advanced as our time allows, given the other obligations, including the level of development activity review, or review activity. And we expect that some of these items will certainly be completed in 2025, others may carry over into 26. And so with that, I will pause there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fusarelli. Quite a lot to discuss, but before we go there, I would like to invite Ms. Peterson to give us the Plan Commission's view. And by the way, we should always recognize that the Plan Commission plays a critical role in how this works. So, and it involves a lot of volunteer work and many meetings and a lot of preparation for these meetings. So thank you very much for all the commissioners' dedication to that.
Thank you. So I'm Tenley Peterson, Chair of the Planning Commission. We heard this item about a week ago at our LRPC meeting. What I'm about to say today will have a lot of overlap with what you'll hear next week at the budget meeting, and then also a little bit of overlap with, we had our hearing this past Monday, and so kind of a lot of overlap between these topics. First, the Commission always has a high regard for equity, the work that the department is doing to advance equity in Arlington. Our specific concerns usually tend to revolve around on-site affordable housing, deeply affordable housing, the new tools that are being created, which we think are fantastic, as well as making sure we have tree canopy and biophilia in all areas of the county. So some of the discussion points from last week's LRPC meeting. First, the principal planner position that we are looking at a possible cut. The Planning Commission almost always does not advise that we cut positions that can be revenue generating. Having the staff on hand and nicely trained up ensures that we get good buildings built on an efficient schedule, which then bring in more commercial tax revenue. And so as we're seeing harder times with commercial tax revenue for the county, having the positions that can advance that, those goals can be really helpful. And I hope Mr. Fusarelli can elaborate on, if we didn't cut that position and are able to fill it, what could we see advanced this year? What additional CMRI priorities could we see worked on? Is there anything we can do for Plan Langston Boulevard implementation? And in the very least, rather than cutting the position outright, perhaps consider freezing it so that next year it can be looked at again so that we can have that revenue generating position to serve our community goals. Mr. Fusarelli mentioned cross-training staff. This, I think, is also going to be really important if we don't have that extra position, or even if we do, because of the economic climate being really uncertain these days. If we do see a less in the development market, perhaps those positions can be cross-trained to work on CMRI initiatives. And for CMI specifically, we would like to see this work continue to be prioritized, as it also is revenue generating and contributes to healthy neighborhoods and streets. Looking specifically at the major amendment, minor amendment, administrative changes, thresholds. In particular, when there isn't a neighborhood impact or policy impact, we encourage major amendments to become minor ones, or even administrative changes. We are eager to see adaptive reuse implementation move forward from not only the CMRI benefits, but also because it's good from an environmental and sustainability perspective. We discussed fees at our hearing on Monday, so that kind of is on the work plan. It was actually a controversial issue with a split vote. We have concerns about the increases in the fees for projects that relate to county policy priorities, such as childcare, outdoor dining, as it contributes to street activation, ADUs as it pertains to providing more housing. We did pass the fee table as proposed. And my colleague who represents us at your upcoming county board meeting will speak more to that. But we're also just interested in how the fees could impact prospective development in the county. I know staff is doing some research on what percentage of the fees, how the increase in fees represents a percentage of the project overall. NAOP hadn't had the presentation from staff before we heard it, so we didn't hear from them. That was disappointing to us, but then again, the information was public, and so they could have come to public comment, and they didn't. So we were also, during our conversation last week, talked about the extension of the approved site plans, how in the state of Virginia, site plans will not automatically be extended anymore, that they will have to be reviewed each time. Overall, the group that we were discussing amongst liked this, as it will force developers to move on projects faster, give us more certainty in the community. It brings the projects up to current standards, but we also worry in a climate of economic uncertainty, which we may be entering, does it kind of prevent projects from coming forward at all? And it's going to increase Mr. Fusarelli's team's workload significantly over the next couple of months, and so that means other work is not going to be getting done. Site plan review committee for the work that I think this maybe hasn't been, it's going to be in the second part of the presentation, but I'll just mention it. We're really excited about the landscape plan reviews happening earlier in the process during the SPRC, so we can provide feedback on that. And during the SPRC process, we can advance our 2019 Biophilic Cities resolution. And then interactions with other departments, which again is part of the second half of Mr. Fusarelli's presentation. Looking at transportation, we had an SPRC meeting recently for the old Walgreens site at 3031 Langston Boulevard. There's an intersection there, which is currently very dangerous. It's impacting kind of the conversations that we're having for that site plan. There's going to be ground floor retail there, but no safe way to get to the ground floor retail. So that was a big issue that was brought up recently. The intersections of planning with historic preservation and historic district applications and how those interact with site plans are a priority for us to make sure we can get projects moved forward in a timely way. And then the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management, looking at the Green Building Incentive Program. We discussed that in the fall. There were some big budget implications for what they were discussing in the fall, but just we want to make sure that that can move forward, depending on what the recommendations for that project are. And then finally, just as a planning commission, we are currently focusing on recruitment, filling possibly 3 positions in the next few months, looking at expertise in architecture, urban form, biophilia, and sustainability. I've been talking with different commission chairs, people who've been involved with the SPRC process, interviewing people who have applied, so that's going well. And looking also with professional development, possibly finding a way to get a commissioner to a local conference, and looking at the comprehensive plan. So thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. The conversation is with us. I have allotted about 20 minutes for that. Colleagues, questions on the first 10 slides? Ms. Coffey.
Yeah, thank you. I think hitting on something that Ms. Peterson brought up, but the cross-training of staff and thinking about professional development. I'm not a trained planner, so I don't really know, but is there ability for staff to flex across current and comp planning? How different are those in terms of job functionality? And if we, just thinking about the position potentially being cut in comp planning, if we end up getting, a huge workload on that side, are there people from current planning who can move over to temporarily support, or is it more truly 2 separate lines of business?
No, I appreciate that question. I think the short response is absolutely. I think one of the things that I value, I think others on our team value about the planning as a profession is the versatility that I think often is involved in even just a career trajectory, right? Planners, I think, rarely stay focused on one particular line of expertise or specificity. And so we have, over time in our team, found ourselves in situations where we may have had to take someone who is on comprehensive planning and ask them to focus some of their time on a development review or vice versa. And our urban design team, I think, is quite well positioned and has the versatility to also cross those boundaries. So that's something that, as we are often tracking and monitoring what we're seeing, particularly on the development review side of things, it's something that is part of our toolkit to potentially ensure that we can meet the moment on what demands we face.
Great, thank you. And related to the expiring site plans, which I learned about a month ago, what impact do we expect that to have on capacity? I think there's quite a few that will come to be either in front of us or just expired. And I know you're in early communication with folks, so it seems like a lot of potentially unanticipated work in the next not even 6 months.
Yeah, I'd say on the good news, Mr. Schreiber, who I will actually turn to you to provide a response, had been closely tracking this and gotten confirmation as soon as possible that we knew that the automatic renewals would not be part of the legislation this year. And so I would ask him to speak to your question more fully. Thank you.
So good afternoon, I'm Aaron Schreiber. And so we've been tracking about 17 projects that are applicable to this provision. What we did was we reached out to NAIOP a few weeks ago once we were able to confirm that no piece of legislation was advancing. So we've made that known. We did not provide a list just because this actually goes back to 2008. So it's a lot of projects that I'm not sure if any fell through the cracks. But we did reach out to all the contacts that we were aware of. We are in receipt of a couple of projects, and we will be batching those together and bringing them forward to the board for their consideration in June. So right now, it's really up to the development community to decide which projects they want to apply on, and we are also aware of a few projects where those property owners are going to let those site plans lapse. And I think that's for various host of reasons related to the market and other things. But right now, I would expect us to receive somewhere around 10 that we'll bring forward in the June timeframe.
And can you talk a little bit about what would be involved in either reaffirming or renewing? Is that the appropriate term for these site plans?
Sure. So in years past, what we've done is we've looked at extending the site plans for another term of 3 years. And in doing so, we've updated conditions to make sure that they're current with standard development practices because those have evolved since the time of approval. What we have not done is gone into those site plans and started making substantial changes such as streetscapes, building forms, things of that nature, because we're not evaluating that. We're just saying how can what the board approved still be constructed, but according to today's standards. So that's going to require us to change, depending upon the age of the site plan, anywhere from maybe 5 to 15 conditions, so that when they do try and start pulling permits, it'll meet a current practice that everyone is familiar with.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coffey. I see Mr. DeFrant is like to.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I guess I'm mindful that we have budget discussions next week on this, and so I think I need a refresher. I've asked this question before in past years, but I think I need a refresher on the distinction between, on the role of urban design. You got 2 vacancies, and one is in the budget. I'm not asking you to turn to Ms. Smith and Mr. Kreider and say, one of you, I'm not adjudicating. I'm trying to get the concepts here of urban design. I feel like is a consultative role in addition to a conceptual role. Comprehensive planning, I feel like is, I'm thinking of the Ballston sector plan and the bigger work. But I'm wondering if you can just describe a little bit those 2 areas and the roles that those two teams play in a little bit more detail.
Certainly, and thank you. Just to, I guess, restate or clarify the question, just looking for a little bit more distinction between comprehensive planning and urban design.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, no, great question. And I think one way to think about it is that, or I would start with on the urban design team itself, right? That's a team that brings a certain collection of skill sets to architecture, landscape, and just urban design specifically. They have certain duties and responsibilities that are part of the day-to-day in terms of architectural and facade plans and reviews, inspections, landscape plans, reviews, inspections. But they also do play and the county architect role as well. They also do play a role in the conceptual and supporting both comprehensive planning, current planning, and many other teams, even elsewhere within CPHD, but then beyond CPHD as well. Comprehensive planning, I would distinguish perhaps by noting the particular focus on the general land use plan, setting land use policy or revisiting land use policy, looking at amendments or updates to the regulatory framework via the zoning ordinance, and then also within comprehensive planning, there's area focused or area specific planning work and effort, particularly in our Route 1 corridors along Columbia Pike and Langston. And so hopefully that helps provide a little bit of clarity, but I understand that it's the nature of our work where our urban design team is jumping into projects to help on comprehensive planning. They're jumping into projects to help current planning and those outside of our division.
Great, thank you. That is helpful. I'm sort of dancing along the line because I'm now looking to your comments about the specific expertise that the urban design brings, and I'm now looking towards the PFRC, the specific to vacant roles. And so I think that unless there's conceptual additions that you would like to make on the two specific positions, that may be a best, conceptually is I think where we should stay now, and then next week we could talk more budget. Is there any ways that you would add because of the PFRC title and in the other, what's the word, not within the division, the section that Ms. Smith manages and is comprehensive planning, is there anything specific about that function that you want to add so that we can start our thinking, keeping in mind that we have heard Ms. Peterson and our, you stifle economic growth, then you're going to have a long-term budget problem. And we have a ton of short-term and probably next year budget challenges. But is there anything you want to say conceptually about those two roles that might add as we start to think for next week? Keeping in mind we'd love to keep both, but also that we are in a tight budget.
Absolutely. I mean, just to keep it brief, appreciate the recognition that the urban designer vacancy on the urban design team also played an additional role, as do many of our team members wear multiple hats. Later in this presentation, we'll see about the full range of commissions that our team supports. And so, yes, the Public Facilities Review Committee Coordinator was attached and has been attached to that particular position on the urban design team, I think because of some synergies with the skill sets and capacity there. I guess all I would say about the vacancy on the comprehensive planning team, that's a principal planner role that, it would be part of a team that's really supporting countywide land use and zoning, land use policy and zoning amendment updates.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Fisarelli. And I may, I don't think now's the time, but I may want to get your thoughts, Ms. Peterson, not at this moment, but over the coming week.
Thank you, Mr. Ferranti. Mr. Spain.
Yes. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know we've allocated only 20 minutes. But first, I want to thank the director, Sami. I see she just walked in. Thank you for your leadership, and to Anthony and Aaron and Jennifer. It's been a pleasure working alongside you over the past 64 odd days. I've learned a lot, and also thank you to the entire CPH team. So where I'm going to come in at, really, I'm going to direct your attention real quick. This is probably not unexpected, but to slide 8, where we're talking about centering equity in our work, right? What I've come to realize in this short period of time that there's a lot of folks who feel as though they're missing in the conversation, right? So when we talk about our planning processes and centering our work and inclusive engagement, can we talk a little bit about what we've learned perhaps in the short term last year and how perhaps we can improve ourselves if need be in getting more stakeholders from the community involved in the process? I know there's timeframes when they can lean in, but I just went through a few projects and we saw everyone who signed up, they felt like they were not heard, but is there any room for improvement there, in your opinion?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's always room for improvement. I think the way we approach engagement now in 2025 is vastly different from how we approached it in 2015 or 2010, both in terms of the resources that we have. Within our department, we have a communications and engagement team that supports not just planning, but the department entirely. And so we lean heavily on their expertise and their support, in addition to the support from CMO CAPE as well. I think it's interesting that I think if we're thinking of some of the same recent instances and projects, I think there's a question to be raised in terms of, is being heard or having your voice heard the same thing as having the outcome be what you want the outcome to be? And so I think that's an entirely separate conversation. But I will say that, and Aaron could speak to this further, some of the updates that we've made in terms of more inclusive engagement at site plan review committees, right? That's something that we hadn't done several years back. The type of engagement that we are going into the comprehensive plan update in phase 1 in a very inclusive way, I think is bringing to bear like all the strategies and resources we can bring to make sure we're hearing from those we might not otherwise hear from. So just in the interest of keeping it short, hopefully that helps address your question, but it is something that we're talking about and exploring on an ongoing basis.
Thanks for restating that publicly, and I think you've kind of talked previously to that same vein. I just think in this moment it's always important to reassure, let folks know what we're doing and how we're evolving. Mr. Chair, I would like to ask a question of our chair of our planning commission, if you don't mind, and one to Madam Chair. Thank you so much for your leadership on the planning commission. It is well received on my end. I did have an opportunity to watch your meeting last week. And I just want to, you made some comments here earlier about there was a concern by the committee as it relates to fees, all right, where there's childcare, outdoor dining, et cetera. Could you give us a sense of, your thought behind, because I watched a few motions to be made or whatever, but the sense of the planning commission as it relates to fees and what went behind that conversation, and what is it at the end of the day? Do you believe it's the sense of the planning commission is that there should be some fee changes?
So I think from our hearing on Monday, there's definitely appreciation that the new fee structure is aiming for 100% cost recovery. Like, that is a valuable philosophical goal. That said, the fees are increasing pretty dramatically, and we did kind of at the dais discuss that some of these fees, when they're jumping, could be contrary to some of our goals. If it's street activation or childcare, we did not pass a motion to that to kind of pull those out. We did have a motion to support the fees ultimately, but we had 2 people abstain. I voted against it because not having the fees weren't aligned with some of our policy goals. So I think ultimately you all will continue this conversation. We are looking at a very difficult budget year where it's kind of a question of can we increase some of our fees, or are we going to look at a tax rate increase, or are we going to look at program cuts? So increases in fees I think makes sense with the goal of cost recovery. We do that with a lot of our Parks and Rec programs, so it's fair to seek the same from our developer community. In particular, staff is doing the research on like how much of a fee is actually as a percentage of the project overall. If it's negligible, maybe it's fine for a big developer. But when we're looking at a childcare facility having to go from, I think, a $600 fee to a $1,400 fee, to me that seems like a lot for a childcare facility that already has trouble with their profitability. They're not making money raising children. They're breaking even, and they do it because they love children. So that was my concern and kind of some of the conversation that we had on Monday at our hearing.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for at least attempting to make that motion, because I heard you. And I think there is space for what you just stated to have a more in-depth conversation. I, in a previous work session, had concern about fees in another area, right? But we are in a very tight year, and I just, again, want to thank you publicly for at least bringing that to the table for a conversation, because when you're talking about childcare and other areas and outdoor dining, there are some strains in our community right now that makes it challenging for other folks, right? So with that being said, Mr. Chair, again, thank you all, and I'll wait for the next segment.
Thank you, Mr. Spain. The conversation about fees will be long and thorough. Ms. Cunningham.
I just want to say, first of all, thank you very much for having this session. I was pretty adamant last year that we have it and lost the coin toss there, but really thrilled to have a deep dive on actually where we are spending our time and what we're getting for it for the community. I think we all know that aside from everything under the sun department that we talked through yesterday, aside from water, sewer, streets, and that sort of trash removal and the things that people touch every week, planning and permitting are kind of a major touch point, both for the board and for the entire staff and the entire community. So ensuring that even in a really challenged time, or especially in a really challenged time, we get that as right as we can is really important to all of us. So I appreciate the analysis and work that's gone into it. I think I will kind of hold some of this for later as we go through, but I am very eager to understand actually where our time is going. And so we've got lists of projects both done and anticipated, but no information about how much time, how much cost, how much elapsed time, how much revenue per project. And I know it's a lot to get into, but I think the intent of having a community and board look at the work plan with you and iterate on it through the year is to make sure that we are putting our values to work and we are fully supporting you. And I know that you all have a lot of pressures this year, but I think where the initial proposed budget is coming out is, we will almost double your fees in many cases, and we will extend your permit time by 2x. And that's a really hard message to sell. So maybe that's the best we can do, but I need to understand the details a great deal more than the materials here enable me to do. So I'll look forward to that as we go through the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham. I want to keep us going just as a segue to the next segment here. The discussion about how we optimize resources is a good one, because we are at a point of change right now where I see that, for example, the year-to-year pipeline continues to be numerically the same, right? But we know from CMRI and other things that there are, challenges there. So I believe that every year was always the conversation about how we align, the available staff time and available department resources with the demand, right? The pipeline demand. And it's never an exact science. We don't know exactly how many site plans will come, how many site plans will mature, how difficult it may be, et cetera. And we have also the board's, not shifting, but evolving priorities sometimes. And sometimes we have more intensive items and sometimes less intensive items. For me, it's more a discussion about how the competence flexibility in the department works. So, for example, traditionally, I've banked a lot on urban design because I think that urban design can anticipate and solve certain problems or shape or frame certain problems in a way that the site plan takes on and delivers. Take, for example, things that may happen over time, almost overnight in urban terms, like, for example, seeing a lot more obsolete buildings around. There are over 70 right now. Entire places like Courthouse here that could attract investment interest and could promise all of a sudden a lot more housing that we anticipated or not anticipated. So we are at a moment of economic flux that, to me, says we have to keep the resources that we have and be very judicious about what resources we actually add, and very judicious about discussions of reducing, if at all. So with that, I'm giving that back to you, and let's see what is ahead of us.
No, thank you. And I just maybe just before we segue, and while Mr. Schreiber is exiting, I guess, or making his way away from the table, I did want to note, I think going back to Ms. Coffey, your question, current planning this past year, we've had, I would say, negative slack capacity. There have been times where the manager of that section has had to take cases to the board and develop that staff report, review it. We had, from planning, we looked at the stats, we had 125 reports led from the planning division that went to the county board agenda in 2024, roughly 30% of all items. And while we do look at cross-training as an opportunity, but if we don't have that excess capacity, or if there's a judgment being made about slowing down or pausing this other project in order to take on this non-discretionary item, I mean, that is part of a judgment call that we make together sort of in that moment. So just wanted to reinforce, I think, just the high level of activity and demands on current planning that we've seen the past few years.
Okay.
Can I ask one other question? And it can be a peg for our next conversation, but do we have benchmarks about how other jurisdictions are handling this? Is everyone flat out? Are we spending more time either through board-generated initiatives or otherwise than other jurisdictions are? Like, can you give us some things to hang on a little bit to be able to?
I don't know that we've, I mean, Aaron can speak up. I don't know that we've had the time to benchmark against other communities. I will say that I think one thing that has helped us is in working in partnership with Arlington Economic Development and the Director's Office and CPHD. A lot of the achievements that are accruing with the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative are actually sort of eliminating, potential applications that might have had to come through staff and then ultimately to the board may no longer need to do so because some of those uses are becoming permitted as of right instead of through special exception. I guess a great question, and we'll take that back in terms of thinking about how we can look at and learn from other communities in terms of how they might be managing some of those similar pressures.
I would just say that anecdotally, I do frequently interact with our colleagues in other jurisdictions, primarily in Fairfax, just because I used to work there. And they're still friendly to me. But no, I think they're sharing the same feelings that we are. Projects are getting more complex. And so a 500-unit apartment building today is very different than a 500-unit building 5-10 years ago. And so processes are different, challenges are different. As Anthony mentioned, we're dealing with things such as, how are we transitioning, from vacant office buildings to productive uses? And these are just a host of new issues that we weren't faced with before. So I would say we spend exponentially a greater amount of time per project today than what we were doing 5 years ago with the same number of staff. So it just puts some more effort onto it. I guess that's something we can go back and take a look at how we can express that in future conversations.
Right. Thank you. I can tell you just anecdotally that we talk with a jurisdiction that's comparable to ours, like DC, the district, and have comparable issues, et cetera. And I can tell you that people are way less frustrated with us compare with the way the district is responding. Okay, let's
Right.
go.
So thank you. And moving on, I think picking up with slide 11. So now transitioning to long-range planning and growth management, our proposed 2025, 2026 priorities include really continuing ongoing land use and planning support for the Barcroft Apartments, while noting that, at least for the moment, the largest updates to vision plans and regulatory codes applying to those properties have been recently completed. Again, expect the unexpected, so there may be future need to revisit components of that, but glad to be moving more into a more focused development review phase and supporting that property in that way. Also advancing work on phase 1 of the comprehensive plan update. As we were just recently talking about last week, working in partnership with Department of Environmental Services and Department of Parks and Recreation on a low residential study, and then completing our review of the special general land use plan study policy and process. So those are really where we intend to be focusing the majority of our long range and growth management time in the year ahead and beyond. Looking ahead to after 2025, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but phase 2 of the comprehensive plan update involving a really broader look at the general land use plan and how that may be updated will be the key upcoming priority for our future long-range planning work after we're able to complete those priorities that you see before you. And then just in the area of special GLUP studies, this month, the county board will be asked to consider the 6045 Wilson Boulevard special GLUP study document as part of the March agenda. We are also in real time determining the next steps for the 1320 North Courthouse Road special GLUP study following the Tier 1 review in December. Currently, that would clear, or the balance of our queue for special GLUP studies is currently clear, though we anticipate, there may or may not be 1 or 2 applications. We'll need to see if any are filed before the June 30 deadline. In recent years, the board has supported, in many ways, the new vision for Barcroft Apartments, including commitments to preserving the affordable housing. Our planning team, in particular, has led efforts to update the Columbia Pike visioning documents and elements of the comprehensive plan, which the county board approved and advertised for public hearings, respectively, last July. And then just last month, the latest county board actions to approve updates to the applicable codes, the general land use plan, master transportation plan, to really reinforce the updates to the vision plan and support future projects and the future of Barcroft, including the first new construction project that the board approved in February as well. And so looking ahead to 2025, we anticipate most of our team's efforts on this will continue to focus on additional renovation proposals, new construction proposals for Barcroft, and also the creation of a phased development use permit tool that will help ensure appropriate implementation and achievement of the Barcroft vision. Just a few more notes on the comprehensive plan update. So one of our team's top priorities this year is to advance phase 1 of this work through layered and inclusive community engagement. This phase will focus on creating an introductory element to better connect the 12 individual elements of the plan in a modern and comprehensive way. By analyzing Arlington's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges, we aim to propose new guiding principles for the comprehensive plan that the board could consider, replacing the outdated goals and objectives that remain from the 1960s. This effort will build on foundational work by the American Planning Association, but also will be tailored specifically to Arlington and informed through extensive community input. And additionally, phase 1 will include scoping phase 2 of the comprehensive plan update, which will explore potential updates to the general land use plan itself. So looking ahead to 2026 and beyond, Phase 2 of the comprehensive plan update is envisioned to focus on really preparing for the county board consideration, potentially broader updates to the general land use plan. While detailed scoping has not begun as of yet, we do anticipate several potential outcomes that are currently as part of our thinking. For example, this effort could refine land use and placemaking goals to align more closely with Arlington's vision for growth and development. It may also involve updating the range of land uses that are depicted on the general land use plan and introducing place typologies to convey our future vision. But depending on board recommendations for a comprehensive general land use plan update, Phase 2 could also include related implementation steps requiring significant future attention. So additional zoning ordinance amendments, for example, revisiting how we approach amendments to the general land use plan. So as we scope this second phase as part of Phase 1, we anticipate gaining greater clarity on what those specifics will look like, and will certainly stay coordinated with the board on those updates. And then last week, the county board approved a charge for the county manager and staff to conduct a study on setting limits in our zoning ordinance for impervious surfaces in residential districts. This collaboration with Environmental Services and with Parks and Recreation and CPHD aims to explore zoning solutions for better environmental outcomes, focusing on stormwater management and tree canopy goals. And with this direction, staff is initiating work on forming an interdepartmental team, developing detailed scoping, considering consultant support needs, starting initial data analysis, and creating a community engagement plan and timeline for this study. Moving on to zoning studies, we've identified 5 in particular studies and potential amendments to address in 2025 and possibly into 2026. We've spoken already about the form-based code amendments along Columbia Pike, including those for Barcroft, just approved by the board last month. And so some of the other top priorities we're looking at this year, studying the definition of family in the zoning ordinance, really, which it will involve the matter of household composition. This has been on our list for some time. Also exploring allowances for certain uses on institutional properties, houses of worship, or similar facilities in our districts, and this would relate to potentially class uses and instructional uses. Beginning further work on the Langston Boulevard Area Plan implementation components that involve maybe the potential for additional tools within the zoning ordinance itself, updating landscape standards and requirements in the ordinance as well, not just in Article 14, but where it may apply elsewhere. We are also progressing work on major site plan amendments, minor site plan amendments, and administrative changes as part of the CMRI. Arena, and part of that would be potentially revisiting the thresholds among these 3, and then depending on various factors. Looking ahead, really putting a marker down for 2026 or beyond. Potential zoning ordinance amendments related to the low residential study are also a likely focus at that point, based on the study's timelines to be determined. And then similar to my comments on current planning, I'll also note here that for these priorities, we expect the work items to be sequenced and advanced as our time and staffing makes available or allows for, given other project work. And we expect several of these items will be completed this year. Others may carry over into 26. And then closely related to our zoning amendment work, and part of that and other work as well, relates to commercial market resiliency and what we are moving towards or looking to move towards in terms of economic resiliency as a value or a goal that can be incorporated into and as part of the comprehensive plan update. Several key accomplishments from 2024 involving zoning ordinance amendments related to parking ratios, shared parking, outdoor visual entertainment. All of these were led by others outside of the planning division, but as noted earlier, planning division support and partnership with those teams. Looking ahead to 2025, there are opportunities to progress the transforming Arlington office policy, including adaptive reuse implementation and further study of redevelopment economics and processes. We also anticipate work in progress on mapping and improving landscape and facade plan submission and review processes, continuing the work we've started there, enhancing systems and protocols for records management and data tracking, aligning site plan conditions with adopted retail policy, and updates to storefront transparency requirements for better alignment, and then also updating administrative change application requirements and guidance. And so with this additional slide, just wanted to convey much of this work, perhaps slightly differently, to emphasize the interdepartmental and intra-departmental collaboration on CMRI related to those priorities. And so from the planning division's perspective, continuing to lead on the review of those adaptive reuse applications that I noted earlier, and also on the full body of work that we call MMA, but the major, minor, and administrative change components. The Research and Strategic Initiatives Group within CPHD focusing on signage, working in partnership with others, and then AED leading on the shared work on the administrative regs, updates for adaptive reuse, removing obsolete office, potential incentives associated with that, and then also a further study of redevelopment trends. And so just with the last couple slides, wanted to focus on other ways in which the planning division supports our work across within the division and then outside of it. So we talked a little earlier about the urban design team. Just do want to note further that in 2025, some of the key priorities we anticipate would be, as mentioned, the zoning ordinance updates to incorporate best practices for landscape standards and associated amendments there. Continuing to involve and participate as part of the Biophilic Cities Network and related work. And then this year is an on-year for the Design Arlington Awards program, which I believe is now 16 years running. So very excited about that. And the teams also will be supporting a variety of other special projects as they always do. We have WETA Economic Development Incentive Grant placemaking opportunity, where work is just kicking off on that to support placemaking near the headquarters. And there are several bridge improvement or replacement projects that urban design team will be providing strong support on. This slide is included each year, and it's the penultimate slide, so we're nearing the end. But this is also at a glance showing a lot of the planning work that is being led by others and very important, but where planning is involved in one way or another. And so DES and DPR are working on updates to their respective elements of the comp plan, the Arlington's transportation future with potential MTP updates, and then updates and further implementation of the public spaces master plan. And then you can see a full listing here, which I won't itemize or read in full, but happy to come back to for further discussion. And then in closing, just want to highlight how our team supports advisory commissions, the Planning Commission, their committees, community groups, and other activities like periodic plan updates and reviewing from outside agencies. Each section of our division supports at least one of these groups, and so wearing multiple hats, but working with Planning Commission leadership to ensure productive and efficient meetings providing additional support as needed. One priority for 2025, excited to work with Ms. Peterson and the PC on exploring educational opportunities or reintroductions into some of the Planning Commission's processes, and how we can best sort of update the base of knowledge and level the playing field so that everyone has a good understanding of what is the site plan review process and how does that work and how do you engage through that review if you're interested. And also just reinforcing the focus and the value we place on staff professional development with conference and training opportunities throughout the year. So with that concludes our presentation and look forward to further discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Fossarelli, which gives us another 20 minutes of discussion on this item. Colleagues, questions? Ms. Coffey.
Quick to the light. Okay, so I have written down a number of questions and I will try and be mindful of everyone's time. Hopefully a quick one. You mentioned for special GLEPs a June 30th deadline. Do we cut off applications for special GLEPs for a full cycle? So it's not like a site plan where it can be submitted whenever and we'll get to it in the correct amount of time. Just there's a deadline and then you have to wait a year?
There is, and great question. I would ask Ms. Smith if she would just want to add a little more detail on how that works.
Sure, thank you. Our process guide institutes a tier 1 review as the first step, and we actually have 2 deadlines per year. So the next one will be coming up mid-year, and then there is another deadline at the end of the year. But if we get something submitted by June 30th or within this next window, we will conduct the tier 1 review and aim to bring that forward for LRPC review sometime this fall.
Okay, great, thank you. I think that's helpful to be aware of. Okay, I jotted down as all the things that I thought fall under comp planning within this because I think it's spread out over a number of slides, but I have comp planning, GLEP review, low residential study, Barcroft, study of special GLEP studies, actual special GLEP studies, definition of family, uses in residential districts, landscape standards, Plan Langston Boulevard, major minor site plan amendment threshold, public district modernization, and then technical amendments and corrections. And that's just things that your group is owning in addition to things everyone else is doing. So I just want to make note of that very long list for everyone. And did I leave anything out? I feel like I probably did.
Well, Ms. Smith can add if anything needs to be added. I would just reinforce, I think, the earlier point. We will not complete all of that work in 2025. And I think going back to some of the other questions or areas of interest, it's been our traditional approach where we are like in real time maintaining a list of top priorities, while at the same time sort of receiving priorities that come to us perhaps sideways. And so as we are able to focus staff time and recognizing that multiple or many of these projects, it's not just an individual, but it's multiple people perhaps within planning and then outside of planning. We just really have a dynamic list of projects that we will look to accomplish some of this work in 2025. Some of it will carry over into early 26. But yes, I think that's a fair assessment. It's possible we're missing something, and Jen can add more there.
I would just add that, of course, not all projects are equal.
Right.
So it is very much layered. Pretty much all of the projects that you listed there, our team would be leading that, but it is also very much an interdepartmental or interdivisional effort as well. So.
Yeah, and you'll be part of other divisions, interdivisional efforts as well. But I think it's just helpful to illustrate how many things, we may not have a sector plan happening this year, but that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of other actions and things happening. And so organizing it into a list like that was helpful for me to kind of get my head around how many different things. One thing I would be interested in hearing is just in terms of like pressure or pain points within all of our processes, what is taking the most time or creating the most headaches, and maybe there are things that we cannot fix, but maybe they are things that we can fix. Ms. Peterson said, don't say the Planning Commission is your headache, but
I'll move to approve now.
Well, I think it's important, and one of the steps that we always take is really on the front end, thinking about what is the scope of what are we trying to do? What is the issue we're solving, so that we really have a roadmap for the future. That's not going to prevent us from having things that we have to adjust and adapt to as we encounter the process. But I think that really gives us insight in terms of who needs to be involved, who do we need to talk to, what kind of data do we need to bring to the table, how will we engage the community and the commissions. But again, there's going to be moments in time where things that are encountered that we need to pivot. And so the flexibility to adapt and adjust is what we just need to handle in real time. And back to one of the points that Mr. Spain was making in terms of equity and engagement, we've always had a history of wanting to engage people. But it is difficult, and there's trying the opportunity to reach people who don't otherwise typically engage is one of the barriers. And is that because they're just not getting the information, or do they just not have time and the resources, or are they pleased overall with government? I think it's all of those factors, and we need to just continue, and we will continue to push to reach people in new ways, and that just takes time and energy. So when we say we need a certain amount of time to bring new policy or important zoning changes that really will change perhaps the built environment that people will see and experience, we want to make sure that that is, carefully constructed.
that's great. That's helpful. I think, reaching people who don't participate is a passion of all of ours, and I would just highlight that in my apartment buildings Facebook group recently, someone posted that the city of Clarendon should do XYZ, and I was like, oh boy, we have a long way to go.
Share that post. I like that.
So, I think sometimes there's just a gap in what people expect, or if you moved here from New Jersey or Massachusetts, where every township is 3 square miles, you might not realize what county government and planning and who's doing what. So I think the education aspect is really important, but I think there's also a lot of people who don't participate because they generally do feel fine with how things are, and it's a lot of time commitment, as Ms. Peterson might be able to tell you, to come to all of these things. And if you feel okay, that may not be worth your Thursday, Monday, Tuesday nights every week. All right, last question. I know you all know I'm very excited about the comp plan update, and I really appreciate the amount of, like you said, first step work that has gone into the scoping and thinking about how we approach this. I also think, thinking about CMRI and some of the ways that adjusting our zoning ordinance has made everyone's lives easier by making it so that not everyone has to come to the board, or not everyone has to go through 8 different steps, maybe only 3 different steps. Are there ways that we can build into our comp plan update to make our lives easier so that, it's more streamlined, it's more effective? Is there a balance also between being proscriptive and being flexible? Like, I think sometimes when you have very clear guidelines, you know exactly what you need to do to meet it, but also sometimes the world changes overnight, and what you thought was what we all wanted is no longer what we wanted. So just general, that was like 6 questions in one question, I'm sorry, but.
And I appreciate having the comp plan update spotlighted in these slides, and we very much know that we need to share more information about that upcoming process and engagement with the board and others very, very soon. So I would say I think a short answer is we very much hope to be able to present the comprehensive plan in a way that is more reflective of our where we sit today, and inclusive of many different policies, but in a way that we have flexibility over time. Because I think just the history of planning, what I have observed and where we sit today, we had moments in time where we were bringing forward very prescriptive information, but then real life gets in the way, right? There's obstacles to that. So we've needed to be flexible. And I think that the comprehensive plan is our highest level policy guide, but it's policy. And so I think we need to have flexibility that it can stand the test of time, into the future. Maybe not 60 years, the way that some of the goals have sat today, but we need it to transcend, 5, 10, 15 years into the future.
And if I could just briefly add to that, I mean, one detail or specific that I'm particularly excited about is, as part of phase 1, the creation of an introductory chapter that can tie together and sort of, I think, make better sense of the 12 individual elements. But I think, if nothing else, over the past 5 years, I mean, we've recognized the moment of great uncertainty that, no one may have predicted back in 2019. And how we think about planning and approach our planning work going forward, as Ms. Smith noted, I think flexibility, economic resiliency, public health, et cetera, equity, a lot of elements that are perhaps in part of our comp plan elements, but not all of them. That introductory chapter, I think, is a real opportunity to make sure that all of the elements do tie back to those things that perhaps aren't as consistently applied today. But how we think about flexibility as it relates to all of our plans, I think, will be an important part of that.
Thank you. Mrs. Spain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I want to direct our attention to slide 16, just so I can gain some clarity into what my colleague, Ms. Coffey, just stated. Really a lot of work going on in these areas. However, I need to understand in this definition of family household composition. Maybe this started before I showed up, but what are we seeking to address? Because I think there could be some potential impacts in residential zoning, and I don't want to look at any constraining housing supply. But what is the spirit and intent behind this? Because there is state law that talks about what a family is. I guess we're trying to figure out applicable to zoning. What is this study all about?
No, that's a great question. And I mean, to be brief, right, our zoning ordinance today has a definition of a family that would limit the amount of unrelated persons that comprise or that are living in the same household or housing unit. And I think we have, through our Affordable Housing Master Plan nearly 10 years ago and other recent planning efforts, there's been a marker placed on revisiting that definition. Sure. To see if, in 2025 or 2020 or 15, today, whether or not that's still the best approach to consider how Arlington should go about regulating who lives together in a housing unit. Other localities nearby have made recent amendments of their own to perhaps eliminate the definition of family and, look towards the building code as the means through which the number of occupants in a unit are regulated. And so I think there's, not having really scoped that study quite yet in full, I think there's a number of ways in which we can look at that, but hopefully that addresses
Sure.
the core question.
I want to follow that one closely, okay? Let's just move real quick, Mr. Chair, just slide 20 and 21, and where we're talking about.
Mr. Spain,
Spain for a moment.
may I also just add to the definition of family discussion? So the Planning Commission has been really interested in this for a while. For equity reasons, this addresses housing affordability, where multiple different people can all live together to potentially afford a McMansion that has been built. If lots of different people live together, 2 single moms and their kids deciding that they can afford to live in Arlington and enjoy our wonderful school system, whereas they wouldn't be able to afford a home otherwise. A group of seniors who wanted to live together, widows maybe, who then want to have caregiving come in once a week. So there's lots of benefits, I think, from an equity perspective to having the definition of family looked at.
That's good to know. Mr. Chair, can I ask my final question?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Peterson, for that input. So when we look at ongoing and upcoming planning support, just have to also know where I come from. I look at all this good work, support and planning and initiatives that's ongoing, and just thinking like, how are we measuring this level of work and effort that your team is putting into, because it's a lot. It says ongoing on. So what mechanisms do you have in place to measure the effectiveness of this body of work that you're actually doing? How can we showcase that?
No, it's a great question. I mean, in terms of measurements themselves, right? We certainly keep track and metrics on the number of meetings, particularly with Planning Commission and their committees throughout the year. That's captured as part of the annual report, recognizing that's just one way of measuring impacts. I think it's a question for us to take back and further consider how we can review and be mindful of the effectiveness. I will say too, though, that some of this work is also kind of on an ad hoc basis, right? The Public Facilities Review Committee may go months or longer without meeting because if there isn't a project need to meet. But I think there's another way to measure that, which is how do the process and how does that review body inform and influence and improve a project? Perhaps, and those are perhaps a little bit more qualitative measurements, but something for us to certainly consider further.
Yeah, thank you. It's just, I know, again, a lot of folks do so much work, I think, from an analytical perspective and making a data-driven decision so we can decide where we put our levels of effort in the future. Just, capturing those touch points in some mechanism will serve us well in the long term. We may not be doing that now, right, Mr. Manager? It may be in the long term. There's tools to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Payne. Ms. Cunningham.
Yeah, maybe just bridging on that. Could we take a couple of these projects and share kind of how big is the breadbasket? So whether it's the family definition, maybe it's not fully scoped out, but is that like a $100,000 project, $1 million project, a $10 million project? Like, how do we think about these things? And in a time where we may need to defer some items, how do we know which ones are must do versus hope to do?
Right, so I will start with that response, and if Ms. Smith would like to add, I would say that particularly for most of our ongoing work right now, I don't think we have any current or active consultant support, right? So we have the positions on our team that we have or that we expect to have, based on the proposed budget, and we are able to assign, percentages of staff time to the priorities that we've identified. Right, so for something like a zoning study, there may be someone who's allocating a certain percentage of their time on that, which may be half, it may be more than half, but there's also other studies and projects that they're working on because of the team-based nature of how we do our work. And so, I think one of the values or the ways in which we approach the listing of priorities is, and part of the reason why we're having this conversation is that for 2025, have we identified, the priorities, these particular projects, is there alignment with the board's priorities that this is how planning should be focusing our work, the time that we have to spend in 2025? And if they're not, right, if they're not the right priorities, or if we need to reconsider it, then that's something that we would do, to make sure that we were focusing our time in the way that aligns with the priorities.
And so is there a spreadsheet or a summary of, for each of these projects, the time that's allocated to them?
I'll just add, for the board's benefit, back to the earlier response, that, in essence, each project is going to be, stand on its own merits, have its own issues, and so we go through a scoping process. And I think it's a little difficult in the abstract to say, this is a 3-month and this is an 18-month or on down the road. We do provide a sense of that just from an overlapping, but we very much rely on our professional staff to complete our work. There's very few projects that we bring requests up for funding. We did mention in the slides that we think for the phase 2 work for the GLUP that probably is something that would need additional consultant support, so we would be back for you for that. And I think the other piece of this is we don't necessarily think about the project in terms of the dollar costs like that. It's more about we're driving towards planning processes. One, if it's a special GLUP study, it's upon request. If it's a long-range plan like a Langston Boulevard, that's really driven out of grassroots efforts and direction from the board. And then a lot of what you're seeing here is we want to have actionable work. We want to put those plans into place so that they can be used, and that takes the implementation. So I think it's really more about those outcomes for us in terms of how we communicate what we're working on. And then obviously we do our thinking in terms of how to actually conduct that work with engagement, and do our best to give you a snapshot of what is it going to take to get through this milestone of a project, milestone by milestone, which we understand there's a lot of interest in understanding, okay, how many milestones and what's the total duration? But again, we may need to be flexible and adapt to changes that we're uncovering as we go through those processes. Hope that's helpful.
And if I could just add, the one other thing too is that for, we did go through the exercise with the fee analysis, that for any application-based work, like we do have estimates, which are averages, but those were sort of a core assumption into the work and the findings of the fee study. I will say that for our larger initiatives with, the comprehensive plan update as an example, but going back to like the missing middle housing study or 4 Mile Run Valley, and I would presume the work before us interdepartmentally on low residential, like once we get to the point of completing that scoping and we determine the community engagement plan, we are then at that point able to like portray a time frame, which is something we typically do, and it will have those milestones. And those are, sort of developed with each project for those that are outside of the non-discretionary work and outside of the special GLUP studies.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I'm asking the questions not to be difficult, but to give some transparency to the community, kind of looking back where we have spent time and what have we gotten for it, and then for discipline, frankly, for this board, so that we can send you out on the right number of things without an infinite number, which is the goal here. And so I think as we iterate on this, getting to a place where we're able to look back at least at what's already happened. I get that it's very squishy and things move, right? But at least to be able to look back and say we did X initiative last year and the total amount of time was this, and what did we learn from it? And before we set you off on something, to say it's between this and this range and we'll get back to you each quarter with how it's going. I think otherwise you risk having an infinite amount of work generated by well-meaning community members and board members. And I think this is a year that we are going to need to talk a lot about discipline and must-haves versus want-to-haves. And so we got to get into a little bit more of the details, I think, to be able to do that constructively. And maybe just a couple examples would be helpful if we can, for special GLUP, phase 1 or phase 2, like, do we have an idea of how big that breadbasket is? For special GLUP study of studies, that is 3/4 of the way done, like, what's that breadbasket? That would really help me, and I think my colleagues, to be able to be more constructive, follow along, help bring that discipline and that transparency as well.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham. Mr. Ferranti.
I really appreciate the conversations from Ms. Cunningham, and then your responses, in that I think the answer is there probably isn't such a spreadsheet, and for good reason in many cases. I don't know whether family is something I want to do, but I would start with like, if we could see the 4 other family studies. The problem is that there are folks who think that the family should be, what's the community in North Carolina that actually didn't exist that was on the show? Starts with an M, but I apologize for not remembering, but Mayberry is a fictional place. But there was public dialogue about we're not going to be Manhattan and we're not going to be Mayberry. Well, Mayberry actually didn't actually exist. So if the board doesn't have the discipline to pass a family change, I don't want to talk about it for like forever. I mean, and this is just, you guys know, if you bring us something and then we perseverate for 4 months on it, you get deflated. And so, for me, at least on the family definition, if we have like 3 other examples in the state of Virginia or 2 examples in Virginia and 1 in Maryland that is not, love our Commonwealth, but part of our Commonwealth is in a different place in Arlington. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but that's an example of like a short circuit, like preliminary way that I'd be interested in, at least. And, because I think it could help. But a couple other questions. Last time community benefits was rewritten in the state code was a decade ago or a decade and a half ago. There is the amount of community benefits is set forth in state code, and we cannot ask for more in terms of our affordable housing contribution without changing state code, as I understand it. And that's not in our plan, right?
I think just to add a little bit there, perhaps for clarity, is that for any site plan development that is up to the maximum limits that are the maximum density limits that are stated in our zoning and general land use plan, that is correct. The developer would have the option, they would have to choose one of 3 options that are currently set forth in the ordinance. And where we do have the space and opportunity to negotiate for more, in which there has been significantly more affordable housing achieved through site plan development following the 2019 amendments to a bonus density or additional density, it's above those limits.
Yeah.
Where we do have that, our team does have that negotiation, and locally we're able to realize additional affordable housing and other public facility benefit through those mechanisms within our local zoning ordinance.
Great. So since I guess I'm just curious as to whether it's time, not until 2026 legislative session, is it time for one-time money to do a little thinking on this? I've been frankly opposed to doing this the last 2 years because the governor ain't going to be interested in it. But I wonder if it's time, and I'll follow up with that. That is not to say I know the answer to whether it's time, but I do think it should be raised. And then the other questions are sort of thinking about the desire to center equity, and it's 238 or 237, so I'm out of time to raise those questions. But, it was raised earlier, it's a slide, but like, just to give some adrenaline to this meeting, what about faith in housing in Arlington? What about something that drives affordable housing more than the project we approved in 5 hours of discussion last week? We cannot control what you can control. We cannot control many things, but and I'm mindful that we have an ongoing litigation, but I just feel like, that is something that I want to ask myself. It's not meant to in any way critique staff. It's that we have to hold ourselves accountable for having a live conversation about not what we did 2 years ago or 4 years ago on affordable housing, but how we're thinking about that now. And so I'm thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly don't want to cut off comments, but I know I'm after time. And if you have.
Thank you, Mr. Ferranti. My only remark here will be that we will have a second bite on that policy apple on next Tuesday, because we'll be talking about housing specifically. I'm going to be practical and finish only with a couple of remarks. Practical means the question in this work session is, is what you propose here for the next year, for this year, for the next year, aligned with our priorities, right? And I haven't heard so far this to be misaligned with our priorities. So I understand it perfectly. If I have to add a couple of notes here, I definitely think that right now the phase one of the framing, like Ms. Coffey said, framing the phase one of the comprehensive plan update is absolutely needed, because I think that it will help us to figure out all the rest of the tools that are that we will need to develop in the next few years. I always like to say that the planning department should have a logo, and that should be a Swiss Army knife with 75 tools, right? So the frame for that is actually this phase one. I'm very excited to see some very interesting proposals for phase two, including some more form-based and place-based planning, which I think we are overdue for that. For this year, I literally see that the major minor site plan amendments. I hope that we will see that completely this year, as you say. The others is CMRI, the rest of CMRI adjustment. I would really ask you to accelerate as much as possible the signage part of that, because we have a tradition of getting stuck on this, and I think that we are today in a better place to have more fluid conversation about that in the community as well, and the removing of obsolete office incentives. And the one question that I have is, how do we do the study of redevelopment trends, and whether this is a little bit further away. I wouldn't expect that this year. We are going to learn a lot in this year, and based on that, we'll see that in 2026. Other than that, I thank you profusely for this presentation today, and for my colleagues for the conversation, Ms. Peterson for being here and sharing this with all staff. I want to remark that we will have probably a second aspect or a second way to discuss things that are very similar to what we are discussing today. With Ms. Peterson, we have been talking about having a common work session with the Planning Commission after the budget. We will decide when this is a good time to schedule this meeting, and we can talk a little bit about processes and what drives these processes, and what are the really hot topics that our community asks us to answer today, and hopefully this will be kind of a baseline for calibrating this ongoing work. So thank you for your patience today and for your attention to this conversation. I look forward to getting back to our March Madness schedule, continuing tomorrow at 2 p.m., right, on the budgets of our constitutional officers. Thank you so much.